Verse 2 then says, one evening David got up from his bed and he walked around on the roof of the palace. No harm, no foul, still no problems here. I go out on my screen porch or take a walk or a run out in the country where we live when I need to think. Well, David went out on his flat roof. Everybody had one back then. And maybe the stars were coming out. Remember, there was no light pollution back then. Every night, God put on a show. We've been having a show the last few nights. There's this comet running around that sometimes you can see within the Big Dipper, I think. I haven't seen it yet. I'm wondering if any of you have. But David mentions the night sky in some of his Psalms. Psalm 8, when I look at the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? That might be all David was thinking of when he walked onto the roof that night. Spend a little time in prayer, maybe write a psalm. But instead, another show captures his eyes. Back to the story. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. This is Bathsheba, of course. Now, this is a place where some scholars try to pin some sort of culpability on Bathsheba, as though she deliberately did this to seduce David. Foul temptress! But the passage does not say that, or even hint at it. And when God drops the hammer on the evil that takes place in this story, it's only David who is singled out. Bathsheba was pretty much doing what everybody did back then. At the end of a hot day, days like we're having now, you go to the coolest, quietest place that you can find to wash away a day's worth of sweat and trouble. But for Bathsheba, her troubles are about to multiply in spades, because there's a peeping David out there. Verse 3, and David sent someone to find out about her. Now, we're going to come back around to this point in just a few minutes, because we want to do an autopsy of David's sin, because this is where his trouble begins right here. And there are lessons for us on how to deal with temptation when it appears in our life. But right now, I want to do a flyover of the rest of the story, particularly for those who don't know it. And get ready. If you don't know it, your jaw is about to drop. So David learns that this is Bathsheba, the wife of one of his own soldiers, Uriah. David sends for her. She is brought to him. It's clear what David wants. It's not to play Yahtzee. He sleeps with her. He's the king. Basically, he's raping her because he has all the power. He is Thomas Jefferson, and this is Sally Hemings. Of course, she becomes pregnant. Well, David needs to cover his tracks. No worries. He's got a plan. He summons Uriah, her husband, back from the war front. Meets with him, asks how the war is going. Hey, Uriah, while you're here, why don't you go back and enjoy some time with Bathsheba? But Uriah, unlike David, is a man of honor. He's got fellow soldiers that are back on the front lines. They're not resting or playing with their families. They're sacrificing for the nation. So he's not going to rest or play either. Next, David gets Uriah drunk and then tells him to go home. Hey, go sleep with your wife. But honor, you see, is not something that you can wash away with alcohol. And Uriah won't go. Well, David then gets all Walter White on Uriah. And he hatches a plot from the deepest depths of hell. He sends Uriah back to the front with a written message for his general Joab, a message that is sealed. And because Uriah is a man of honor, he's not going to read that message. The message says, send Uriah to the forefront of the hardest fighting and then pull the men back that he might be killed. And like his boss, Joab throws his honor away by doing as David instructed. And Uriah is killed in battle. And David then takes Bathsheba and adds her to his harem of wives. Meanwhile, guess who's watching all of this? With a broken heart that's filling up rapidly with fury. God. And in 2 Samuel chapter 12, we learn how God reveals to the prophet Nathan what David has done. And he sends David back to the palace to confront David. It's absolutely brilliant how Nathan does it. He tells David a story. He goes in and says, "Hey, Your Majesty, I just heard something so disturbing. There's this rich man, and he owns a vast herd of sheep, but he lives right next to this poor man who only has one little ewe, and they let the ewe run around in the house with him, and the kids play with it. They feed it in their arms." Well, this rich man had some guests that came the other day, and rather than take some sheep from his own herd, you know what this guy did? He took that poor man's ewe right out of his arms and slaughtered it for his meal. David's listening to this, and his face is getting redder as he listens. And then David says, "As the Lord lives, that man shall die. He shall repay him back 4 times what he has taken." And at this, Nathan stares deep into David's eyes and says, "You are the man." One of the greatest scenes in the Bible. Hollywood cannot come up with something this harrowing and gripping. And then Nathan goes on to describe how the Lord will punish David. And it's at some point soon after this, with his moral vision now cleared, and his heart shattered by the realization of what he's done, that David writes Psalm 51.